Okay. Our daf today is Daf Yud. This is where we're up to. Um, just going to point out that we learned, um, uh, we learned yesterday, all these things about Godol Yom HaGeshamim, how great a rainy day is, that it's almost as if you're witnessing the ingathering of the exiles. Right, or the greatness of the Yom HaGeshamim is as if you're witnessing the creation of Shemayim Ba'aretz. We saw that at the end of yesterday. I mean, what it means is that when you see and experience the rain, if you think about it, it's such a great wonder, as almost like all these examples, like Tchias HaMesim, like the ingathering of the exiles, the creation of the universe. So a person gives person pause of how people always waiting for that big miracle that God's talking to them, and you can witness it by just observing the rain. That's what we've been learning. Hi, Sheldon. How are you? Okay.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. So, okay, we're just beginning Daf Yud. So let us begin. Let's make it bigger. Okay. Tanu Rabbanim. The rabbis taught Daf Yud. Eretz Yisrael Nivreis Tchila. Eretz Yisrael was created first. V'chol ha'olam kulai, and the entire planet Earth, this means the planet Earth, Nivra Lebesoif, was created at the end. Shenema, the pasuk says, Ad loy osa eretz v'chutzis, that God created the Torah. It's a pasuk in Mishlei. Prior to him making the Eretz, which is Eretz Yisrael, right? V'chutzis, and the beyond the confines, which means the outer boroughs, so to speak, which is the rest of the world. So we see from this pasuk that Eretz Yisrael, when God created the earth, the Eretz Yisrael was created first, and then the rest of the world. We're going to learn a lot of Kabbalah today. I'm not sure if you can take this literally, but we'll see. Eretz Yisrael is that the Brisa continues. Eretz Yisrael mashka oisa hakadosh baruch hu ba'atzmai. When Eretz Yisrael needs rain, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, he waters it by himself. But when God wants to water the rest of the world, it's only through a messenger. God's not himself involved. Shenema, because you read a pasuk, it says in Iyov, talking about Hashem, Hanoise, and he gives matar al pnei haaretz, matar on Pnei Aretz. Aretz means Eretz Yisrael. Always. The plain Eretz means Eretz Yisrael. V'shaleach mayim al Pnei Achutzis. And God sends the water to the rest of the world, the outer boroughs, so to speak. Eretz Yisrael, another thing about Eretz Yisrael. Shoyse Megashamim. The real source of rainwater goes to Eretz Yisrael. And V'chol ha'olam kuloi mitam tzis. The rest of the world drinks from the residue, or so to speak, the leftovers of what Eretz Yisrael does not need. That gets distributed to the rest of the planet. Shenema, hanoise mata pnei aretz. God gives the real rain to pnei aretz, to Eretz Yisrael, and the rest of the water that's not needed, he sends it al pnei chutzos, on the outer boroughs. Next, Eretz Yisrael shoyse tchila. Eretz Yisrael drinks first. In other words, it drinks from the water first. First, it gets satiated. And then everybody else takes it at the end. This is very similar to what we're just learning. So, the same idea that we just saw before, someone not even gathers that. So we learned over here, Marshall, if you want to give a parable, a person that's making cheese. I'm not sure how this process is done, but imagine somebody making cheese. He takes the cheese itself, and leaves over the residue. So somehow you take the cheese out, and there's a lot of residue. The cheese refers to the bulk of the rain, the main source of the rain that belongs to Israel, Eretz Yisrael, and the rest of the world gets the residue, the leftover. Okay, we learned yesterday a Gemara that said that there was a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Let's see if I have it over here. Okay, let's just bring it up. Rabbi Eliezer said that where does the water source come from? So Rabbi Eliezer said from the ocean, that the ocean comes up and it goes to heaven, and then it comes down to earth. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, the cloud goes up, and so to speak, God opens up the heavenly water from outer space, pours it into the cloud, and then the cloud is like a sifter, and it drops down to earth. So it's a machlekes, a scientific machlekes of what is the source of the water. So now, the Gemara asks a question, Amamar. The Gemara asks the question to Rab Lezer, how could it come from the oceans, but the oceans are salty? In fact, 97% of the world's water is salty. Just 3% is fresh water, and only, let's say, 0.25% comes from lakes and rivers. So, and most of them are aquifers or the water underneath the earth. Anyway,
the largest, I think, is frozen in Russia. The largest freshwater lake, I think, is frozen.
Right, the glaciers are
yeah, they said frozen. It's like I forgot. My wife teaches it, but like if you take a gallon and that's all the water in the whole world, drinkable, 1 teaspoon is accessible or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was astounded by that when I looked it up. That 90 so much is not edible. So that's the big question. If rainwater comes from the salt water, it comes from salt water. How does it get sweet? So in science, that probably is very simple, because when the water turns to vapor, the salt is heavier. It doesn't turn to vapor. It doesn't turn to a gas, so it doesn't go up. But the Gemara says, no, it goes up as salty, according to Rab Lezer, it becomes sweetened in the clouds. So the Gemara says, Menale, how did Rab Lezer know this idea? From science? No, he knows it from Psukim. It says in the pasuk, it says the darkness of water in the thick clouds. Cheshchas is choshech. Uksiv, another pasuk is a similar pasuk in Shmuel Beis, which it says chashras mayim avish chakim, the pouring of the water, the gathering of the water in thick clouds. So chashchas and cheshchas seem to be similar words. So the Gemara says an interesting drasha. Shekol kaf ushdei aresh. Take the chaf from cheshchas, put it into the word chashras. Ukribe chachsharas, which means you combine the words and you have this word chachsharas, which means, imagine the ches could even turn into a hay. Hechsher. It becomes hechsher in the oven. It becomes kosher in the thick clouds. You see how that fancy drasha, that's how he knew that the clouds make it edible, drinkable water. It desalinates the water. So that's how he had this drasha, Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Yeshua, Bahani Kro my Darsh, Rabbi Yeshua says they don't need to become sweetened in the clouds, because the water is coming from heaven. It's not coming from earth. So what does he do with this pasuk? Savalaki ha the Asi Yasser Abdimi Omar. He said Amri b'Marava. In Marava they said Nahar Anane. When you see the light colored clouds, Zeire Mahi, then you know that there's not so much water, raindrops in those clouds. Chashoich Anani, but if you see dark clouds, Sagin Mahi, then there's a lot of rainwater in those clouds. So that's what he darshans. Cheshchas Maim, the darkness of the water determines how much rain is in the thickness of the clouds. And Chashras Mayim is the gathering of the water, which he darshans the same way, that the water gathers from heaven. Somehow it ends up in that cloud and it gets sifted into the cloud and comes down as raindrops. Kaman Ozla, who does this following brisa align itself with? How the tiny that we learned in a brisa. Mayim ho'elyonim b'maymer hein tluyim. The upper waters, that means the heaven waters are like standing in it's suspended in outer space. There's water in outer space. Upeiroseya megashamim. And we get benefit from that in rain. So that means the water from outer space is the source of our rainwater. Shenama, this brisa says, it's an anonymous brisa, the primasecha tisba'aretz, from the fruits of your actions, from the fruits of your creation of heaven, that's how planet Earth gets satiated. So that command, the obvious author of that brisa is Rabbi Yeshua, who says the source of the rain on planet Earth comes from Mayim El Yonim, from the outer space waters. Rabbi Lezer, what does Rabbi Lezer do with that pasuk? That is talking about the the handiwork of the Eibishter, that from the creation of oceans and earth, that's how we get water from. So you could sing those, this pasuk with Pri Masecha doesn't refer to the creation of heavens, it refers to creation of the oceans. That's how Tizba Aretz, that's how the rest of the planet gets satiated with water. Masecha doesn't refer to heaven. Okay. So Rabbi Shuma Leila. Rabbi Shuma Levi said, Kol Olam Kuloi, the entire planet gets Bitamtsis Gan Eden. There's a place called Gan Eden. Eden is a place, and in front of that Eden place is a Gan, is a garden. So that from that garden, the residue of being that garden being watered comes, that water ends up on earth. Hushaisa, whatever that means. Shenama. The pasuk says, "V'nahar oitzmi Eden." In the creation of the word in Parshas Bereshis, this says there was a river that went into Eden and then flowed into the Gan, flowed into the garden, and that gave water to the garden where Adam Rishon was staying. And somehow it divided into 4 major rivers that you see on planet Earth. One of them is the Nile, Euphrates. All these rivers, great rivers that you see, the Amazon, come from, the source came from, as it left the garden, it ends up in different places on earth. That's what so we see that the first things first, the water gets water, you water the garden, and then the rest of the world gets watered. Tana, we learned in the Braisa, bitamtsis base kur shoyse tarkov. From, if you water a base core, a land that you can plant a base core, which is a large amount of wheat, that means that amount of water, the leftover water, which you see on the floor and things like that, you gather it up and you could shoyse tarkov, you can water a piece of land that could plant 3 calves in there. In other words, whatever is left over from a 60 part group, you can water something that's 1/60th of that. The leftover of a large piece of field, the leftover water can water something 1/60th of that. And we'll see like that, the same idea. This, if you're going to say one number on this daf, it's the number 60. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Eretz Mitzrayim habidalad meis parsa al dalad meis parsa. The land of Egypt is 400 parsas size-wise by 400 parsas. V'hu echad mishishim b'kush. And the land of Egypt is 1/60th of Ethiopia. The Kush in Ethiopia, echad mishishim ba'olam, is 1/60th of the rest of the planet. V'olam, and our planet, is echad mishishim b'gam, is 1/60th of the garden. The Gan echad mishishim le'Eden, and the garden itself is 1/60th the size of Eden. The Eden echad mishishim leGehenim. And Eden is 1/60th of the Gehenim. So Gehenim is very large. Nimtza kol ha'olam kuloi, the entire planet is so small, it looks like a kisi kedera leGehenim. It's like the cover of a large pot for Gehenim. Gehenim is the large pot, and the cover is a small thing. So the rest of the planet is so small because Gehenim is so large. The Yeshamim, some say Gehenim ein lo shir. Shiur, the Gehenim is infinite. The size of Gehenim is no size. The Yeshamim, some say the opposite. Eden ein lo shir. Eden has no size. So whatever this Gemara means, it reminds me of that you can sometimes see on the YouTube the when they do certain popular videos called size comparison, when they show you how big the moon is, the earth is, and you compare it to other planets and then the sun, and then they take it so out there into larger and larger and larger stars, you realize how earth is just nothing. So the same idea over here that you see in this Gemara, that we're very, very, very small, but the largest thing seems to be Gehenna. Amar Rabbi Aishia. Rabbi Shaya said, "My diksiv shechanta al mayim rabis oitzares." It rests on Bavel, rests on a body of water, and therefore their storage houses of food are full. So the Gemara says, "Mi garam lebaro shiyah oitzarei seha meleas bar." What causes this phenomenon that Babylonian, somewhere in Iraq, there's no problem, there's no food shortage there. It's all their storehouses are full of wheat, Why? Because the land itself is in a valley or somewhere deep, and there's a lot of water flowing there, and therefore they have a very good source of water. So plants grow well there, and there's no problem. Amarav, Rav said, Asira Bavel. Bavel is a rich place. The chatztia beloy matre. You can grow produce there without even having rainfall. The ground itself is moist. Amar Abaya Niktina, Toivana V'lo. It's better to live in a place where it's soaking wet. The ground is soaking wet, so to speak, and not dry. Somehow, Bavel is a very fertile place to live. The cradle of civilization is a very fertile place. Therefore, they don't even need rain, and therefore it's a rich place. And that's all based on this pasuk that it's Shechant Amayim Rabim. Okay, new Mishnah. Begimel, we talked about now we're talking about V'sein Tal U'Matul Levracha. We saw that we start Masha V'Ruach HaMerageshem on Shmini Atzeres. Now this Mishnah is going to say, talk about, hold on. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Hold on. Good. Now the Mishnah is going to say, regarding the same Tal U'Matul Levracha. So the Mishnah says the Gimel b'Marcheshvan on the third of Marcheshvan Shoy Alan Es Geshaman. On the third of Marcheshvan, if you go to Israel, they would start saying the same Tal U'Matul Levracha. Rabbi Gamliel says b'Shiva Boy on the seventh day of Marcheshvan, which is the time of what? Which is the time of the first Yoira rains. Remember, we learned about the Yoira rains. The first rains are supposed to come, according to Rabbi Gamliel, 7th of Marcheshvan. And now, he says the reason why it's the 7th day, it's a science phenomenon, but he gives you a nice way to remember it. Because, hold on, pardon me. Okay. It's Tesvav Yomim, it's 15 days after Chag. 15th day after Sukkot, you start saying the same Tal U'Matul Levracha. Kedei Shiagia Achrein Shebi Yisrael, so the last person of the Jewish people could reach Nahaparas. You see, Eretz Yisrael extended to the Euphrates River, and therefore people only in Israel are mechuyev to Oila Regel, to go to the Beis Hamikdash on Sukkot. So to way home, the last Jew to make his way, who lives in the north of Israel, the extreme north of Israel, to make it home, that's the siman to remember, and it usually takes 15 days. So that's when the siman is that we will start saying the same Tal U'Matul Levracha when the last Jew gets home. Now, I want to point out to you that we start same Tal U'Matul Levracha at night, not by Musaf time like we do by Mashav Ruach Barageshem. And the reason is because Mashav Ruach Barageshem, wherever you are, it starts at the same time. Because everybody starts in the Mashav Ruach Barageshem by Shmini Atzeres. So they made it to start by Musaf time when all the Jews are in shul. Saint Tal U'Matul Levracha is usually depends on the place where you live, actually. If you live in Israel, you start saying the same Tal U'Matul Levracha early. And if you live outside of Israel, like in Bavel, or technically if you would live in the United States, it should even start later. So you would start, each Jewish community starts at a different time. Therefore, they start saying the same Tal U'Matul Levracha at night anyway. So because it doesn't look like, some people starting this way, some people starting this way. Anyway, it's all broken down and into different communities when to start saying the same Tal U'Matul Levracha, depending on where you live. Amar Rabbi Lazar, the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel. Tanya Chananya Omer. Chananya said, Ubagoila, if you live outside of Israel, in Bavel, so you wait 60 days after the fall season. So which means what? You wait to either December 4th or December 5th, depending on if you have a full February or not full February. If there's a February 29th, then it's December 6th or December 5th. And then if it's not, it's December 4th. But the bottom line is because each season, if the 4 seasons are broken down to 91 days and 7.5 hours. So usually it rounds itself out by December 4th, December 5th, I think. I want to tell you, interesting, that this is called a Daf Yomi coincidence, that today is November 22nd. In the early Rishonim, they wrote down that we should start saying the same Talmud of Roch on November 22nd. We do it December 5th. And the reason they wrote November 22nd, which is today, is because their calendars were different than our calendars. So they had different days or something like that. So it really did come out November 22nd on their count, but not really the way they straightened out the calendars in the 300-400s, later than that. I'm sorry, they straightened it out, and therefore the Saint Tal Bracha was moved from November 22nd to December 5th.
Yeah, I think it was two issues. It's the Gregorian and Julian, and it's
right,
off by 11, and also every century you, other than every 400 years, you shift by one day because the solar year is imperfect. It's not precise. So I think every century, although 2000 is an exception because that was still a leap year, but normally you lose every century. If you look at the old Siddurim, and even I think the Kitzer, it would say December 3rd and December 4th rather than December 4th.
Right.
There's calendar creep, and there's also the Gregorian and Julian calendar problem.
Yeah, it's interesting how how they got together to make this big change. It must have been a big change at that time. But I saw it brought down from the Avud Raham, who's one of the Rishonim. He said, say it November 22nd, and he said Keben. The way to remember it is Keben, Chaf Beis Nun. Chaf Beis is 22. Nun, he said November. So it's funny that we're learning all about this today. The halacha is like Chananya, that you start 60 days after the Tkufas Tishrei. They asked Shmuel, when do you say the same Talmud L'Bracha? Shmuel lived in Babylon. Amalahu, he said like this, watch this person. This person called Rishba will bring in his wood into the storage. When he starts doing that, then you should start the same Talmud L'Bracha. So we see that must be a different time period. So you told me it's at Shishim Batkufa, it's 60 days into the Tkufa. 60 days basically is from October 7th. And here Shmuel gave you another way to know when to start saying the same Talmud L'Bracha. Follow this person, this probably farmer or whatever, and usually the farmers are very smart people. They're meteorologists, engineers, and everything. So the Gemara says, no, it's one time period, 60 days into the Tekufa, after Tekufas Tishrei, is the same time when this person would bring in his wood. Ibayalu, they asked the question, Yom Shishim, Kilifnei Shishim, or Klacha Shishim, the day number 60, right? If you count from October 7th, 60 days, the 60th day, is it counted as before 60 and you would not say the same Talmud L'Bracha? Or is it counted as after Shishim and you would say the same Talmud L'Bracha? Tashma, come in here. Rav Amar Yom Shishim K'Lacha Shishim, Ushmuel Amar Yom Shishim K'Lifnei Shishim. Rav says it's like counted as after Shishim, and so you should start saying on the 60th day the same Talmud L'Bracha. And Shmuel said, you say it beforehand. You don't say the same Talmud L'Bracha because the 60th day is like the days before 60. It's like day number 59, 58, where you wouldn't say the same Talmud L'Bracha. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, B'simonach, I'll give you a siman. Because it wasn't in the Girsus, we didn't know for sure who said what. Rav said this way, Shmuel said this way. But the way to know for sure and to remember the siman, Rav, who comes from Israel, right? And then moved to Bavel. So normally Israel Boyamai, he's an Israeli, so living in Bavel. So therefore, these people want water. So therefore, he says the 60th day, you already say the same Talmud L'Bracha. Tatoi, Shmuel, who always lived in Bavel, he lived on the lower part of the planet. Loi Boyamai, he doesn't need water, so he holds the 60th day is you don't say the same Talmud L'Bracha. Rav says you start saying the same Talmud L'Bracha even on the 60th day. Amar Papa said, Hilkasa, the halacha is Yom Shishim, the 60th day, you don't say the same Talmud L'Bracha. I'm sorry, you do say Saint Talamat Bracha on the 60th day, like Rav said, Kila'acha Shishim. Like after, it's like the after of the 60th day, and on the 60th day, you would say the same Talamat Bracha, like Rav said. Says the Mishnah. Hegia Yidzayim b'Mar Cheshvan. If you reach the 17th of Mar Cheshvan, let's say rain didn't come down, the Yechidim, the singular individuals started fasting. Not every Jew fasts, only the Gedolei Hadar. And the Gedolei Hadar is somebody called a Yachid. And the reason why they're called Yachid, because to become a Gadol B'Yisrael, you have to be able to ask you learning in any part of Torah, and you can answer it on the spot. So Yachid means a unique individual. That's what Yachid mean. I was thinking to myself that if you're so smart, generally you're lonely also. So you just can't fit in with people. So they're called Yechidim. So they started to fast to pray for the Bnei Yisrael because it's the 17th of Mar Cheshvan and no rain came. So it was a type of fast, an easy fast. The night before they can eat and drink. Throughout the fast, they're permitted to do work, berchitza, to wash, or basicha, to anoint themselves, and they'll put on shoes. To have relations with their wives. It was a light fast. But Higia Rosh Chodesh Kislev, if Rosh Chodesh Kislev came, and no rain came down, Bezdin Goizer and Shalish Tanias Halatzibah. Then we have 3 fasts for the tzibur. Everybody has to fast. They eat, but it's a light fast. You can eat and drink from the night before. You can do all the malachas that you would not be allowed to do, let's say on Tisha B'Av. You could do it on this fast. It's a light fast, but everybody gets involved over here. So Gemara says, Man Yechidim. Who are the Yechidim? Rav Huna, Rabbanan. We'll see what makes a Yachid anyway in the Amud Beis, but I'm telling you, it's somebody who you can answer anywhere in the Torah. You ask him a question, he knows the answer. Rav Huna said, Yechidim Isan and Shalish Tanias. The Yechidim would start fasting 3 fasts to start to pray for rain. They would start on a Monday, Sheni v'Chamishi v'Sheni, Monday, Thursday, and Monday. My Kamashmalan, what's the Chiddush that their first fast comes out on a Monday? The Tanina, this is a Mishnah. We don't make a gezerah for a tzibur to start fasting. If the tzibur is an eis tzara and they need to fast for rain or for whatever problem, the first fast should not be on a Thursday. It should start on a Monday. Why? Because if they started fasting on a Thursday, so the villagers may have not known, the ones that bring in the food to the main city may have not known that they're fasting. And therefore, comes Thursday night, people are buying out the stores. And generally after fast, you buy out a lot, more than you can eat. And then you're buying for Shabbos at the same time. So the prices are going to be raised, so to speak. And therefore, in order to prevent that from happening, a run on the supermarket, they never made a tinus. They never said for the tzibur to start fasting on a Thursday. So this is a Mishnah. So why did Rav Huna come along and teach us that when the Yechidim start fasting, they should begin on a Monday? So Gemara answers, Mahu Desema, without Rav Huna, I would have thought, Hani Milit Tzibur. If the whole Tzibur is fasting, the whole Jewish people are fasting, yes, then you don't start on a Thursday, you start on a Monday. Aval Yachid Loy, but the Yachid, these Yechidim are fasting on their own. I might think that if, let's say, Yud Zayin Mar Cheshvan was on a Wednesday, so then the next day they should begin fasting. Kamash Milan, no, they have to wait till Monday to start their series of fasts. Tanya Name Hachi, we learned in the Brisa, Kischilu Hayachidim Lesanos, when the Yechidim, the Gedolim, started to fast, so Misanan, they would start their first fast, Sheni, V'chamishi V'Sheni. They would start the first fast on Monday, Thursday, and Monday. Umafsikim Rosh Chodashim. And if Rosh Chodesh came out in middle, for example, if Yud Zayin Mar Cheshvan came out on a Tuesday, they would not begin their fast till next Monday, which would be the 23rd of the month. And then Thursday would be the 26th of the month. The following Monday for the 3rd of the fast would be Rosh Chodesh Kislev. So they would skip that Rosh Chodesh Kislev fast because you're not allowed to fast on Rosh Chodesh. We go to Amud Beis. Uviyam Tovim Aksuvim Gliglas Tanis. If during their fast a Yom Tiv comes out, if the Yom Tiv comes out, that, one of those Yom Tiv's holidays that were written in Megillas Taanis, which we don't keep except Purim and Chanukah, but if any other Yom Tiv, we wouldn't fast. They would continue, they would interrupt their fast and continue after for the next Monday or Thursday. Tana Rabbanim, the rabbis taught, Al Yoimar Odom. Now, a person, what the Bryce is going to teach you is that, first of all, there's a big Avera to become a Baal Gaiva, which means the Chafetz Chaim writes in his introduction to Shmiras Haloshen that being haughty could be an Issa D'Oraisa, V'shachachta Hashem Elokecha. So a person could say, I'm not Rabbi Kamenetsky or some other Gedolah, so I'm not going to be fasting because it's only Yechidim. Tana Rabbanim, the rabbis taught. Al Yoima Adam, a person should not say, Talmud Ani, I'm just a Talmud Chacham. I'm not a big Gadol B'Yisrael. Eini royally as Yachid. Don't count me in as a Yachid. Ella, rather, it's not considered Bal Gaiva. Kol Talmud Chacham Yechidim. Any Talmud Chacham, any person who knows how to learn, he could conduct himself like a Yachid and could begin fasting even on the first series of fasts. And the Brisa describes Ezehu Yachid ve'Ezehu Talmud, who is called a Yachid and who is called a Talmud. Yachid is the unique person of the generation. Kol Shiroi L'Manoisif Paras Al Tzibur. He can be put in a high position he makes the decisions for the Tzibur. So usually a Gadol B'Yisrael. That's a Yachid. Talmud, what is called a Talmud Chacham, or somebody who knows how to learn. Kol She'al and Oiseh Dvar Halacha Bilimudai. You ask him a question in what he's learning, and he learns very clearly. He doesn't have brain fog. If he's in that Masechta, and he can answer you clearly. Even if he's learning Masechta Kala, which is a very easy Masechta, if he's a Talmud, he's considered a Talmud Chacham. So he also, if he wants to conduct himself like a Yachid and fast, he's permitted to do so, and it's not considered Bal Gaiva. But you and me, or anybody, a plain person should not begin fasting, because for a plain person to live, to pretend he's a Talmud Chacham or a Yachid, that wouldn't be good, because that's you're conducting yourself with Gaiva. Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught, Loi kol ha'raitz latzis atzmi Yachid oisa Talmud oisa. Rabbi Meir argued on this whole thing. Nobody can, if you can't make yourself like a Yachid, you can't make yourself like a Talmud. And interestingly, the Talmidim, Chachamim, used to wear, let's say fancy dresses, like a beketcha with a nice high hat. If you're not a Talmud Chacham, you should not be putting on those clothing, because Rameir is concerned about Bal Gaiva, and therefore he says you're not allowed to do that, and you're not allowed to fast. Rabbi Yossi is only talking about fasting. If you want to fast and you're a Talmud Chacham, you could fast, like we just learned before. And we'll thank you for that. When you're conducting to fast, you're not, showing off. You're actually putting yourself under stress by fasting. So we permit you to fast. But if you're not a Talmud Chacham and you want to pretend, put on the beketcha and all that to be like a Talmud Chacham, even Rabbi Yossi would not permit you to do that, because that's, acting in a certain way that you're not on that level. Tanya, we learned to the Brisa. Tanya idach loy kol ha'roitz lasas hatz miyachid oisa Talmud oisa divrei Rab Shimon ben Elazar. So he said what Rameir said. You can't change who you are, because that looks like you're Bal Gaiva. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel oima b'medvar marum b'dova shel shvach. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says, yes, to put on fancy clothing, to act like you're a Gadol B'Yisrael, don't do that. Aval b'dova shel tsar, if it's causing you stress by fasting, oisav zachul atov shein shavach huloi el tsar huloi. That's not something to show off about. That's only a tsar. You're fasting, so then we permit you to do that. Do Gemara. Guy was fasting, and the tzara, all of a sudden started raining in the middle of your fast. Or you're fasting for a sick person, and he got healed, or even if he died. So now there's no reason to fast. You have to complete your fast that day, and if you made a commitment to fast a series of fasts, you have to complete that too, because once you made that commitment, so to speak, you have to stand by your word, even though you don't have, the reason doesn't exist anymore. If you go from a place that they don't fast, they weren't in the tzara, and you go to a place where people are fasting, you have to join the crowd and fast along with them. If you're coming from a place where they did fast, and now you're going to a place, you flew somewhere, and then they're not fasting. You have to fast and complete your fasts because you came from the place where you were part of the commitment to fast. So if you traveled out of the city to another place and they're not fasting, you have to continue with your original commitment from where you came from. Now, the Mishnah, the Brisa says, Shocha v'ochel v'shasa. If a guy ate and drank, middle of a fast, he forgot that we all committed to fast. Al Yisra b'fnei tzibur. Don't continue eating in front of the people. But al yanig idun ba'atzmai, and don't fill yourself up with delicacies, because it looks like, as Rashi explains, you're like a chosen, acting like a happy person amongst avelim. And we see this idea in the Chumash. Shenema, the pasuk says, when Yaakov wanted to send his children down to Mitzrayim to buy food, really Yaakov and his family did not need food. But Vayomer Yaakov, Lovorov, Yaakov said, just join the crowd and go to Mitzrayim and buy food. Lama tisra'u. Why should you be seen? What does that mean? Omalem Yaakov lebanov. Yaakov said to his kids, Al taru atzmechem k'sha'atem seveim. Don't be seen, or don't show off yourselves that you are, you're full. That means that you don't need to join the crowd in this depression and people are starving. Don't look at yourself as if you had food. Loi b'fnei Esav, loi b'fnei Yishmael. Don't, especially not in front of Esav, not in front of Yishmael. Kadesh lo yiskanu b'chem, so they shouldn't be jealous of you. Certainly, Yaakov lived amongst the Knainim, but they won't be jealous of him because they're not related. They'll figure that this family is one lucky family and they don't have to buy food in Mitzrayim. But if Esav and the children of Esav and Yishmael find out that Yaakov doesn't have to go buy food in this hunger because he somehow has food in his wheat storage bins, so they'll be jealous. So don't bring out the kinna against Bnei Esav and Bnei Yishmael. One more line. Al tigezu b'darach. So the Gemara Darshan, when Yosef revealed himself to his brothers, he told them, go home and don't fight on the way home on your way to tell Yaakov, I'm alive. Amr Ablaza, Amalehem Yosef Lechav. Yosef said to his brothers, Altis asku b'dvar halacha. Don't get involved in a deep eon in dvar halacha. Why? Shema tigazu alei maderach, because you're gonna the literally that means the highway is going to be angry at you. It means you're going to get lost. So don't get so involved in learning. Aini, but that's not true. When you're on the road, you should be talking and learning. Two Talmidei Chacham that are walking the way, the Ein B'neihem Divrei Torah, and they don't have words of Torah, Ru'uyin li saref, they should be burnt. Elisha was walking with his student. Elisha was walking with his Rebbe Eliyahu Hanavi. It divided them. I mean, and they were talking and learning. The whole reason why that they weren't burnt, although there was a chariot of fire there and horses made of fire, because they were talking and learning. But if they were not talking and learning, they should be burnt. So the bottom line is, the question is, how could Yosef command his brothers, this is not the time to learn. Go home and tell dad I'm alive. But we see that from another place that you're supposed to be, when you're on the road, you're supposed to be talking and learning. And if you're not talking and learning, bad things should happen to you. So the Gemara says, Loi kasha, that's not difficult. Hala migras, ha li'iyune. If it's learning plain things, set items where you don't have to think deeply, that's what you should be learning. But what Yosef was saying, Yosef says, don't get deep into the halacha. He said, Al tigizu b'darach, al tisasku b'devar halacha. How we come to the conclusion of halacha, going through all the different opinions and back and forth and lumdis, that you should do, because that will cause you to be lost on the road. So this is a side point that we brought in, because once we were discussing Yaakov telling his kids to go down, Lamet Yisro, don't show yourself off as if you have food. So the Gemara goes off on a tangent to discuss Yosef instructions to his brothers when they go down to Mitzrayim, when they go back to their father, to tell him that he's alive. Okay. Okay.
Where did we stop?
We stopped by Masnita Tana. Like a few lines from like 8 lines from the bottom. But Masnita Tana Yud Amid Beis.
Thank
Okay,
you.
very good.
It's there.
Goeiedag. Dank u wel. Een goede nacht.